Good afternoon, Mr.
Hey,
Wilkins. Can
Rachel,
you
how
hear
you
me?
doing?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How you doing?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Celebrating Father's Day. Got cooking night, day and night, midnight, all that. But okay, how are you and your family?
I'm doing good. We all right. They cook, they grilling. I'm over here studying. So you know how that go.
Well, you can always run by and get a plate. We put it on the front porch if you want one.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Um, we're going to start with one simple question. Can you please tell us your name and anything you want to share about yourself that will help us get to know you a little better?
Okay. My name is Corie Wilkins. I am a product of the South Side of Chicago. Went to the University of Missouri for undergrad. I got my bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism. From there, I went straight to grad school. I went to Duke Divinity School. A recent graduate of there, and I'm really just about the work of helping people. I think this is a very important conversation, and I'm honored to be here and to share some insights and to help in any way I can.
I appreciate that very much. So, you graduated already. Yes, I hear you. Did I hear you say that? Did
Yes, I did. I did. Graduated. I graduated a little over a year ago, May 2019.
Okay. Can you tell me what the University of Missouri was like as a Black man on campus? I've never been in Missouri, but I've heard some really strange things. Can you tell us a little bit about Missouri?
It was difficult. It was very difficult. I think in ways that um, I won't necessarily say I thought we as a country were beyond, because I didn't. But I think what made it very unique is I did not expect racism the way that I experienced it at the collegiate level. I think for some reason there was this presumption that because people were there to better their lives, to gain a higher education and a higher understanding about the world around them, that somehow that institution would be above that. I was 17 when I first went. I had scarcely been on campus 2 days I before I had my first racial slur thrown at me in undergrad, and there were some other people who I presume to be students who threw things out of their cars at me and some friends of mine.
Well,
I remember it like it was yesterday. That happened. Similar situations happen either on or directly, or either on campus or in businesses and establishments directly adjacent to campus. A number of times while I was there, it was the hotbed of racial upheaval, and that's what basically kicked off the protests of 2016. It took on a national spotlight, and it was a very interesting time to be there. I think what happened there was very powerful and very important because it shined a light on a lot of things that were really happening at school. Like, I don't think Missouri was special in what was happening there. I think because of where it was, and it's the show me state, people were very boisterous about their thoughts and their beliefs. It was not as politically correct of an environment. And I think that made it easy for a lot of other institutions to condemn the University of Missouri. But speaking with other friends from other institutions, having attended other institutions of my own, I've learned that what was happening at the University of Missouri was very much happening in a number is happening in a lot of other places. Yes, there may be efforts to make things better for students of color and Black students and students who are maybe a little bit off the traditional paradigm, but is present everywhere, and it's very ugly in ways that a lot of people might not necessarily expect. I was privileged to see a lot more just because of committees that I served on, people that I worked with, both faculty and students. So I saw a lot, and a lot painted my picture that every student at the undergraduate level isn't privy to, and so that shaped my understanding of it as well. But it was ugly. It was ugly. I think history will look back on that moment and will and not, I don't even say history in the sense that we have to get so far removed from it as far as time is concerned. Admissions dropped drastically in the years to come. And I don't necessarily know that the school has fully recovered, and that was almost 5 years ago. And I don't expect them to recover anytime soon, at least.
Admissions mean Black and brown students asking to be admitted, or just any ethnicity?
Yes, them attending. I mean, there were dorms, there were entire dorm buildings that were newly built, that newly erected, that couldn't even be filled, not even close. And I think Black students really saw, I think Black people and Black students saw that it is not just, you don't just have to accept what you feel, not even what you feel, but you know to be unjust and unfair treatment. Just because this is the institution that you pay your money to, or there's this idea that the power lies with them and not with you. I think the way that people mobilized over what were very, very legitimate and egregious racial concerns. I'd been stopped at the school store it hadn't touched the thing, was simply walking through to get to class. I remember I was stopped, and dozens of people walked past me, and the machine went off when I walked past it, the sensor. And I remember multiple people walked past, and not one of them was stopped, questioned, anything. And they're basically, one of the workers there tried to search me because she just was convinced that I was the one who had stolen something. And the stories like that are not uncommon. It was, yes.
Yeah. What was the student to faculty ratio in terms of diversity and that? So did you have any Black professors, male, female, brown professors, male, female?
At the University of Missouri, I did have, so I can say I did have some Black professors. I did have some female professors. It was, I couldn't give you an exact number. I know the numbers paled in comparison to what would have been more reflective of the campus and the world we live in, as far as, student demographics or things like that. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. My entire time there, I had 3 Black professors over the course of 4 years, over the course of about 4 or 5 courses every semester. So yes, there were, three is a stretch. It kind of, I had a few Black TAs, maybe 2 or 3, but generally speaking, I had 2 or 3 full professors who were instructing my classes.
Exactly. So how did you get from the University of Missouri to Duke?
Well, that's a very interesting story. I think for me, I went into journalism with this idea that was the method that was really going to be able to help me carve out my niche in the fight for justice. And that's not just for Black people per se. That is for any and everyone who experiences some form of injustice, and there is a story to be told surrounding what it is they live every day. That's people in the LGBTQ community. That's those are women in the various forms that they are marginalized. Those are people who are undocumented and I mean, victims of crimes. If there is an injustice, I'm the type of person, I want to be a champion for that person and for that cause. And whether or not it is something that I feel like I have a direct tie to or not, I think safety and justice are things that people deserve solely off the strength that they are people, and not because they have done or have not done something. But I got to the end of my formal journalism program, which was very intensive training. It was the #1 journalism program in the world at that time. It's a very highly renowned program. And I remember getting to the end of it and just kind of understanding that it wasn't for me. I think I had this idea of what it would be like. And while it gave me very relevant skills, while I had the privilege of learning and being trained by phenomenal faculty who really taught me how to see the world through lenses different than just my own, I just realized that I did not want to be a journalist. The newsroom environment, justice work is stressful, but the newsroom was a different beast. I did not feel well there, and I felt, and again, this isn't I don't think the professors that I had did this per se, but I felt like the larger institution was something that more often than not was going to be a thing that put me in a box, as opposed to setting me free to really do the thing that I thought was necessary. And so in the midst of that, a lot of personal things kind of took place. My father got sick. My mother was back in school, so there wasn't a lot of money coming into the house. And I took on a little bit of a different role, as far as went from just being a student to helping to make ends meet for myself and for my family. And, found myself in some rather precarious situations in the midst of being a student and working 2-3 jobs at one time, and up all hours of the night and then back up in the morning. It was just it's a very tough time for me. I don't know that I was the healthiest I could have been as far as just my mental space. And I know that now, but at the time I couldn't really put words to it. I'd seen my mother and my father work, from sun up to sundown for more of my life than not. I saw most of the people that I came up with working that way. So I thought it was normal. And it is not until much more recently, the last year or two, that I'm realizing that it's not normal nor healthy for people to work themselves into the ground like that. That we're humans and not machines. And so, but in the midst of that, my faith journey really started to be revitalized in a lot of new ways, a lot of ways that had been alien to me before then. And the long and the short is that found myself accepting a call to ministry, thinking that would not just be the next stop, but that would be a more effective route for me in the fight for justice, because I could implement what I felt like to be core values that were deeply inherent in me, and then I could stand on those as I went about doing the work that I felt was necessary. And so I started applying to seminaries, a little very apprehensive, in fact, because you're always taught that when you graduate, you want to go get a job, not necessarily go do more school, unless you can directly tie that school to some form of a high revenue, or at least a stable revenue producing job outlook. And ministry didn't necessarily look like that, but I just felt like I just knew that it was the way to go for me. And so that's what I did. That's how I ended up at Duke Divinity School.
Okay. And can you compare Missouri to Duke in terms of the experiences you had at both institutions?
Yes, I can. And it was a point of significant reflection while I was at Duke. I think the undergrad experience, like I said, if that's your first time going through college, and most of the people in your immediate reach didn't necessarily go, you really don't have that much of a point of reference for what it should or should not look like, what is or is not healthy, how it what standard protocol should be for how one goes about that 4 or 5, however many year degree program. And so there's a lot of stuff I was really kind of figuring out as I went along. I would be able to call my sister or people, and it's like, what do you think about this? How do you think? And I did find mentors, and a lot of mentors found me in that space. Mentors that did not always look like me, but took a serious investment in who I was. I found that at Missouri, and that was wonderful. But I got to Duke, and it was interesting because I came in and I was like, I have no idea what the South is going to bring. Being from the Midwest and being from a city as diverse isn't quite the word, but just as complex. It has as Chicago, it has so many different moving pieces and so many aspects of culture for everyone. I grew up in such an environment where diversity really was more than just a buzzword. You could experience different cultural groups, experiences and cultures. A lot of people, you go to school with these people, so you see a lot coming in. And I don't necessarily, and so I got to Missouri and I realized that, okay, how I grew up is very much not people's norm. But then I got to Duke, and it was very interesting because if people had an issue with you because of your skin, where I went to undergrad at the University of Missouri, and then in that surrounding area, they would just tell you. There was no pretense. They would really just come about it directly, and in a lot of ways kind of dare you to respond in whatever way you felt necessary. Duke was very different. um, I was Duke was a whirlwind for me because I never at the University of Missouri. What I can say is that generally speaking, the Black students there were really on top of their game, and a lot of them came from places like St. Louis or Chicago. So, and then you compare their lived experience to people who grew up in rural Missouri who have not seen a lot, have not experienced a lot outside of their own primary sphere. And so from academics to social life, the Black students at the University of Missouri were simply just, they were just very astute. We were very astute. And I guess the popular term is gaslighting, wasn't quite as effective there because we knew what we were talking about was real because we had lived it. Duke was very different because one, the demographics are different from a graduate student perspective. So I was going to school with people who were in my generational bracket and some people who weren't. Um, People came from much more far and wide distances. And so I didn't necessarily I didn't necessarily go through my program uh, with a lot of people who were from places like from my city or from cities that were near or like mine in terms of layout and demographics. So there were a lot of, I really got to Duke and I realized that where there was for me at least, a large sense of camaraderie because at the University of Missouri, because if nothing else, most of us were poor. Most of us grew up poor. Most of us grew up in similar ways. And there was just a sense of camaraderie and shared understanding of what our experience was like as Black people there, that even when we didn't agree, that we still understood each other. And I got to Duke and I realized that that was not necessarily the case. Popular adage, all skin folk and kinfolk really took on new meaning. I had, I think on the one hand, I had people who I would hold the door open for them out of courtesy, people who didn't look like me, and they almost took it as a given. No verbal response, no visual acknowledgement, nothing. But in that, while anger provoking was something that I learned how to deal with and address, but what hurt profoundly more was seeing people who looked like me, who were scared to acknowledge me and scared to be in real, genuine relationship. Not necessarily because they did not care for me, but because they were so scared of what the potential consequences of being grouped a certain way, being portrayed or perceived or seen a certain way, and how that could negatively impact them in the thing that they had fought hard for a large part of their life to get, and it was in hand, and they didn't want it to impact their next move. So that was tough. Seeing Black people and people of color who did not necessarily identify with the plight of a lot of other people who may look like them on the outside was difficult. But the biggest thing as far as race and diversity and racism at Duke was that I had never really had someone try to intellectualize racism to the point that it happened to me more often than not there. It's easy to spot someone who is overtly racist when they are throwing around racial slurs or they're just very direct about their disdain for you. It is much more difficult to spot it when it doesn't look like a racial slur, but it looks like someone doing their best to pull statistics or pull alternative perspectives or pull things that on paper may seem valid as to why your lived experience and why your perspective shouldn't be valued or shouldn't be taken seriously, when it's not. And many days until you learn to navigate it, you come home and you have to sit with yourself and ask yourself questions about, man, am I crazy? Like, what was everything that I thought I experienced a lie? Right. Or do I have to stand firm in my truth in understanding that while this person may not agree or while this person may try to make it seem as though what I'm saying is irrational, in my heart of hearts and in the hearts of the people who share this experience, we know it is not.
Yeah.
And that is a that is a difficult thing to navigate. And it was difficult for me as a graduate student and a number of other graduate students that I knew who had lived experience that far stood beyond the confines of a classroom. But I can't even imagine how difficult it must be for undergrads to, in the midst of figuring out who they are as people, are also having to learn how to navigate a system that their whole lives have been told is necessary for their success, and having not as much infrastructural support as they need to do it well. So the long and the short is that the racism was equally, if not more, palatable at Duke. And the experience was much more difficult because it's not really enough to just be able to go into the classroom and learn. You have to go into the classroom, and a lot of days, you know, it's not just a fight to learn the material, but it's a fight to not have other people somehow devalue your lived experience.
Yeah, when COVID hit, I remember seeing an email that went out from somebody. It said learning remotely. My first thought came to my mind, learning while Black was what came to my mind, as opposed to learning remotely, because they're making certain assumptions about what people have at home and how people learn and all that. But that's for another day and time. So have you ever felt physically unsafe by white people, Black people, any color people, law enforcement? Have you ever felt your health and your life been at jeopardy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, I grew up, you know, on the south side of Chicago. Had a lot of family from different parts of the city. And I tell people I had it much better than most, in the sense of where I was, but it still wasn't a rose garden. And you very much had to go, even the block that I lived on, regardless of that place being a little safer than other places, you still have to get about town. I had to take 2 trains to get to school every day when I was in high school. Sometimes it was 2 trains and a bus. I mean, any combination. And that is not necessarily the presumption that was an easy path at 6 a.m, or sometimes at 7, 8 at night after everything's done with school. Yes. I think, but again, it felt so normal. At the University of Missouri, it was a little bit different for me because I had worked so long to establish myself as a physical presence. I mean, I was lifting weights. I'm a very assertive person just by nature. And I think I was shielded from a lot of what I otherwise would have experienced, a lot of what a lot of friends and people close to me experienced, just because just off visual inspection, I look like a very formidable opponent. And a lot of people, where I could see they might have otherwise, for lack of better words, tried me, a solid look in the face would make them rethink it. And so that spared me a lot. And that's something that I learned just growing up where I grew up. But I oftentimes found myself, excuse me?
I was just going to ask you, did you also feel your physical presence in jeopardy at Duke?
Yes. I mean, not even just with with it being such a wooded area and it being so dispersed as far as like one building to the next. But I think, if in full transparency, more often than not, as a Black man in America, I feel unsafe. And it doesn't have to do with anybody who's smaller or bigger, but it is just like, you know, an argument at the grocery store with someone
Cost you your life.
can easily, the most trivial of things can at times become a life threat. And we see that, you know, that's, I think, part of what has the world on fire right now. You have these seemingly small encounters, these, you know, these, in the grand scheme of things, fairly trivial pursuits. And then you have people losing their lives for it. And when you look at the facts of the matter, most reasonable people look at it and say, there's no way that should have ever ended in anyone's life being taken. And as a Black man, my experience has more often been than not You have to fight your battles very carefully. You can display a lot of you cannot really display emotions other than anger and be accepted for them, but at the same time your anger has to always be tempered, and your anger can never really go to the extent that's warranted by the infraction against you, because it can be a thing that costs you your life, not even because you're wrong, but just because someone was scared of you. So yes, and there has been a significant amount of therapy going into, I guess, rework, keep being mindful of that mentality for my safety, but also learning to check when it is present, when it may or may not be serving me. But just because it's familiar, my tendency is to retreat to it. I think I'm a type of person who simply just refuses to live in fear. I can't, the idea of being imprisoned to the point where I can't go to this place and I can't talk to this person and I can't do X, Y, or Z when I have the right to do so, is a thing that I take seriously. And I want that not just for me, but for everybody. And so it's tough. It's a tough balancing act, but more often than not, whatever that thing is that I want to do, I work to figure out a way that I can do it and still best maintain my safety and the safety of those around me. But I've absolutely felt unsafe before. I've had people at the University of Missouri physically attack me in the midst of, in the midst of, an argument that turns racial, or bias, overt bias comes out. I dealt with it the way that I needed to. And I was fortunate in that way to be able to. And yet it could have very much gone another way on either of those circumstances. Absolutely. And I think that's sometimes just part of what being Black is the fear that though it should go this way, the smallest change in the situation can make it go this way.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this question. So, and I don't know if you mentioned this or not, but when you got your divinity degree, did you go into the church, or are you still actively, and I don't know what the correct term is, pastor, minister, preacher, what's the correct term?
Yes, I still serve in my church. I'm actively ministering. COVID has changed the landscape of that in a lot of ways that many people in the faith landscape, I guess at least vocationally, are still figuring out. But yes, I went into worked in hospital chaplaincy, and I stayed very involved with my local church, and so that has been very rewarding, to still be able to serve in that capacity and to see my own growth as I help other people reach their highest forms of growth to the ability that I'm able. But yes, it's and there are. What I'd like to say is that all of the people who came out with me, we are doing okay as far as being able to provide for ourselves and serve in capacities that make sense for us. But that was not always the church for everyone. And a lot of us had to make hard decisions and had to make some concessions that we should not have had to make, just off the strength of where we are as a nation right now and everything that's going on.
So, I'm going to ask you about Mr. Floyd, but first I'm going to ask you about that T-shirt you have on. So this is how they see it. And it's the 5 young men who were incarcerated for supposedly raping a white woman in Central Park in New York. How do they see us?
When they see us, I think the they has to be defined. First of all, I think the they is a very important component of that whole equation. And this isn't, I tell people when we have this conversation, I think it's important to understand that like any one person can say what I'm about to say, but it is very important not to just tie that down to the opinion of one person, but really look at the facts, look at the research, look at the history and the context therein. I think that they, in a lot of ways, is fair. It's just about everyone. I think Black people, specifically, yes, people of color have there's different nuance that comes with being a person of color and how you experience, racism or various other isms and xenophobia within the world. But for Black people specifically, I think when they see us pointed to the fact that you had children, nonviolent children, who were not even in the place that they were accused of being. And there was they, I think, is really a huge part of the collective consciousness of America that historically has not done right by Black people. It just simply hasn't. The collective consciousness, what is?
You lost your audio. Oh, you're back now.
Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but I can't see you. It keeps popping in and out.
I'm sorry. There's something that's coming up. It's 704-712. It looks like someone else is trying to call in.
Not too early?
Is that you, Eric?
Yeah.
You're too early. Can I just, I'll call you as soon as yours starts, okay?
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, bye.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. I think is a country and a world that, and these are not just my words. This is James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time. This is Maya Angelou and her different works, particularly I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. This is Fannie Lou Hamer. This is Dr. King, Malcolm X. These are all of these voices that are saying what we really have to contend with is a society that took everything from Black people and then was just wholly unwilling to do whatever was possible to make that situation right. When I keep pointing to was so significant for me because when you look at how many people failed, the boys that are on my t-shirt, now grown men, when you look at how many people across various different points of society, when it relates to them, the court system, when you talk about just people that saw them people that knew them in their daily comings and goings, the school system, everyone failed these children. And because of that, they saw them as something that was subhuman, something that was monstrous in nature. These children were robbed of their childhoods, were robbed of their innocence in a lot of ways. And ultimately their lives would never be the same because of a world that in some ways doesn't see us and when we are in pain, but in other ways sees us in ways that are not reflective of who we actually are and can be and have been historically. I think there's so much that one can point to about the Black community and point to it with this finger of discontent and say, that is wrong, that needs to change, that shouldn't be the way it is, they should do better by themselves, they shouldn't tear each other down. All of these disparaging things. And it's so contextually inaccurate because you were taking the people who for longer than not have not had what they needed to be well and have in fact had to give of themselves to make sure that everyone else was well economically, financially, were used for the sexual pleasure of others, demeaned on every level possible for a human being. And the expectation is that you take a government policy here, you take a little bit of funding here, you take the misnomer of affirmative action here, and you take all of these pieces, you haphazard diversity in a lot of ways, you take all of these pieces, you haphazardly throw them on the board, and you think that somehow that is supposed to make up for all of the harm that has been done to this community, that it's a wonder Black people have even survived in America, much less thrived in the ways that we have. And so to get back to your original point, I think that when they see us, I think that they is just the larger context of America and all of the subsidiaries therein. And I think the question of when they see us or when will they see us, I don't really know. I think where we are now, in a lot of ways, we are being seen. And there are a lot of people who have issues with the method that is occurring in. And to those people, while I take a little bit more of a conversational stance with it. But my whole perspective is, yes, you can see the things that you don't like about what's taking place in our cultural moment. And can you legitimately hold to what standard have you had to ignore and disregard the things leading up to this moment to justify the vilification of the people there that are in the moment right now?
Right. So let's go there. Let's talk about Mr. Floyd. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. You said you do a lot to stay in shape and all that stuff. If you had to run 8 minutes and 46 seconds, how taxing would that be on your body?
I am, by most standards, in very good shape. Running 8 minutes and 46 seconds for the average American is a feat that is, for the most part, fairly out of their grasp. Right. To run at a sustained pace for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and to be running from someone, most people can't effectively do it. They might be able to get through it, but to effectively run from a legitimate threat that's pursuing you for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, that's pretty tough. Most people can't even run a mile in 8 minutes. And so
I cannot run a mile in 2 hours.
It's not just you though. It's a lot of people that simply can't do that. Yeah. But most people, I've trained in martial arts and I've done a lot of things like that. And I think one thing for me personally, just having the experience that I have in watching George Floyd's killing by Derek Chauvin, is that when you are in the midst of a chokehold of some kind, or when you are doing an arm bar or a leg lock or anything like that, there's a very specific point of tension. And it's different for everyone that you're doing it with, different partners you're working out with or using it against, but you know it when you feel it. It's that point where if I push any more, this person's arm is going to break or their ankle is going to break, or if I squeeze any more or even just hold this posture where I am, they are going to go unconscious. You know the feeling, and then you know when they go out too. It is not, if you haven't done it, it's not a thing that I can explain to you on paper, but anyone who has done it would agree that you know, and you can feel it. And from there, it becomes a very intentional act to not let go, especially during a chokehold. And just like you know when that person is on the brink of losing consciousness and when they've lost consciousness, it's a very fine line to keep holding it and to not be aware of the consequences that could come. And so it was very, very apparent from not just body posture, from not just the actual knee on the neck, but from the body language and the situational posture and the look in his eyes and on his face, the entire demeanor, that was a very intentional act. And that the sad part for me is George Floyd did not have a prayer in that moment. To have a grown man urinate on himself and call out to his mother, who has been deceased for years. Yeah. To watch all of that be ignored, to watch his knee still be on the neck and him refuse to move it or even let up, to even let the EMT come and check the man's pulse. There's no justification for that.
Yeah. I mean, Corie, I agree with everything you just said. You know, I have seen the video so many times now, I can't even process it. A lot of my friends say I don't watch it anymore. But, you know, you see two Spelman and Morehouse students trying to find some food, and they're tased in their own car. I mean, like, they aren't posing a threat to anybody. They're in their own car, or I guess they aren't responding to the officer's commands, and so that means you get tased. I mean, then right after weeks of Mr. Floyd's death, another Black man was killed. So
Right.
all of this protest and all this we're talking now, you think we'll see real change? You think that America will become more, see us as human, if you will?
I think that's a great question. And I've been wrestling with it myself. So I don't know that my response is necessarily definitive. I think it's more so kind of just where I am right now. A good friend of mine put something in a lot of perspective for me as I was thinking about this. He said, the Civil Rights Act of 1965 did not pass until 3 days, after 3 days of continuous looting. And I may be mistaken on the exact bill, so charge my head, not my heart. But Martin Luther King was assassinated. There was national protest, riots, if you will, and I hate to even use that terminology because I don't think it's very accurate. But there was grand social upheaval for 3 days, and after that, national legislation went forth that ultimately is considered as one of the hallmark moments of success of the civil rights movement. 3 days of, for lack of better words, if we don't get sleep, you don't get sleep. If we don't get rest, you don't get rest. If we don't have peace, you won't have peace. And I think the preacher in me always has to point toward hope. And I think a lot of people think that that is a cheap excuse. I think a lot of people are hoped out. And I think a lot of people, I think there's some people who want revenge. I think there are some people who want justice, but simply don't know how to go about getting it. And I think there are some people who just don't really know up from down and left from right now. And while I may not agree with everyone's methods, I think all of those perspectives are equally valid. My mother was almost shot in Chicago as she came upon a car accident. She's a nurse. She got off work and she saw a car overturned. She said for miles, they had basically been scorched earth. She said everything, every business, short of one Dunkin' Donuts and one other retailer, was basically decimated. And through a cloud of smoke, she sees a car overturned as she's getting off a 12-hour shift at the hospital, driving home. She gets out to render aid. She doesn't see anyone in the car, but the moment she kneels down, bullets start flying from both directions.
Oh my God.
Thankfully, she was able to get to safety. She's fine. We are blessed for that. And while I do not agree with that, and I do not think that has anything to do with the murder of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery or any of the countless other killings that have happened recently or historically. Yeah. I think what we know about human beings is that everyone has a breaking point. And I think I think it is a mistake to simply look at these people and say they are breaking the law, they are doing things that are illegal, or even that they are just opportunistic and they want to steal and they want to loot and they want to get over. I think the reality of the situation is you have had people who have been denied access to education, people who have not had equal treatment in the eyes of the law, people who have had unequal access to different social services, people who have not had their psychological, or as COVID has highlighted, even their physical health needs met. You have people who are not well. And it is not their fault that they are not well. They have not been given what they need to be given to be well. And they have watched other people who do not necessarily look like them have these things while being told that there was simply not enough to go around for them. And they understand that that is a lie. And they're not going for it. And so I think in the midst of all of this, I have to point toward hope, because the day I believe the day that we lose hope is the day that we might as well quit breathing. And I say that also holding the nuance that I very much understand and do not make judgments against those who have no more hope to give. I think there are I think we're near the end of this. I think this will get much worse before it gets better. Mm-hmm. I think COVID in being thrown into the ether of this whole situation only makes things worse, because as people are fighting for justice and are fighting for their lives and their rights to be heard, and simply treated fairly, you will have a lot. I think the plight of Blackness is that it's almost like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, because if we sit still, we follow the regulations and we go about change in the business as usual blueprint, well, if we do get it, it takes forever, longer than either of us have on this earth. And even then, it's not necessarily what we want. And if we don't get it, there's not much we could say because we simply did not fight for what we needed. And on the other hand, you have people who are out here doing a very good, very necessary work. And in the midst of that, many of them will contract COVID. Many of them will go on to not show symptoms, but carry the virus to other people in their lives who are much more susceptible and have a number of comorbidities that will not allow them to survive the disease. There are many people that will die as a result of these, not just national, but global protests that are going on. And hear me now, I'm not saying the protests are not good, not necessary, and that they should not be happening. I'm simply speaking to what a consequence of them will be. And in that, Derek Chauvin will be responsible for more, and Derek Chauvin will be responsible for more than just the loss of one life, because all of these things can directly be streamlined to his actions in Minneapolis. And I think that's the plight of Blackness, is that when you fight, when you don't fight, you die. And when you fight, sometimes you die too. So I think for us, the sad truth is that for our lives and livelihood, we have had to always be more focused on what do we feel like is the bigger goal in our lives. That is how we got off the plantation. That is how we got through. That is how we got through Jim Crow. That is how we have made it through I think that is how, as a people, we survive. And I'm just looking forward to the day that I believe will come eventually. I'm not saying that I don't think we'll ever see a day where there isn't racism or a day where there isn't oppression of some kind. I don't know that we've ever had a moment in history where that didn't exist. I think humans, while I believe we are fundamentally good, have a deep propensity for evil that is unspeakable. We have our need for self-preservation, and our desire to not be on the bottom will cause us to hurt other people when it is unnecessary. And I think that's just a fundamental fact of what we've seen throughout history. I do think for Black people, things will get better. I can't speak to when or how that will happen. It's just my fundamental belief that it will, because it has to, because if it doesn't, why are we here? So I have, as the preacher in me has to point toward hope, but the preacher in me also believes in justice and has grace and understanding and empathy for people who do not see it the way that I see it.
Well, Corie, thank you so much for this talk. It's been amazing to talk to you, to see your beautiful face, to hear your words of wisdom. I'm really, really grateful for this. And thank you so much for agreeing to do this chat with me.
Oh, no problem. I'm super. Thank you for the opportunity. It was great to see you, just talk to you. You know, we had conversations like this more than once. So I'm glad to just be able to get something a little bit more concrete down on paper. I think you asked some very relevant questions. I think you asked some questions that a lot of people are not asking.
Yeah.
I think one thing in closing, I really want us to understand as people is that I think this, and how do I put this? I think what we are missing is that there is very much a scenario where everyone can win. Yeah. And that's why I hate this cultural moment, because it's always pitted against, it's Black people pitted against law enforcement. It's Black people pitted against white people. And in the midst, and neither one of those, while I understand the thought process behind it, neither one of those leaves room for the people who are in the middle. When it's Black people against law enforcement, what do you do with the Black people who are in law enforcement? Or for that matter, the white people who are in law enforcement who are also working to impact the change because they exist. When it's Black against white, what do you do with the people who are not necessarily don't necessarily call either one of those racial groups home, but are deeply impacted by the issues the same way. What do you do with people who don't necessarily ascribe to what the opposing party might view as the thoughts of the what do you do when you have people on the white, quote unquote, white side who don't necessarily believe everything that's spewed from their camp? And what do you do with people on the black side who are in the same position? I think there needs to be, people need to understand that. And I really don't think this falls on black people as much, if I'm being completely honest, because I think black people have really done, I think what's missed is black people, before we got to this point, truly have exhausted all possible measures of amicably resolving the situation. Peaceful protest, Colin Kaepernick for months, peacefully, for an entire NFL season, peacefully protested and was blacklisted and couldn't get a job. And he peacefully protested because there was something prophetic in his imagination that saw a foreshadow of where we are now. And now you have people that are sitting here and that argue that there was no voice in the wilderness crying out, that there was no one speaking to this truth that many people are experiencing, and that there was no one who said this would come if things didn't change. And so all of this to say, I think there is very much a scenario where everyone wins. I think people have to be willing to acknowledge that historically there are some groups that have held on to some things that were simply not true. That were simply not accurate of the other people, or of people that they thought were on the other side. That we have all been lied to, but some of us believed the lie because it worked in our favor, while others of us were cursed by the lie because it worked against our best interest. And when we get to the point where we really look at it, and we see that everyone can really win, and that when Black people and people of color have what they need and are treated better in the society as a whole, that doesn't hurt anyone. That only benefits everyone. And so those are my final thoughts. It's just that if you approach this from the perspective of something's being taken from you, or that someone is hurting you, or someone is trying to, or that someone else having what they need takes food off your family's table, takes resources away from your community, that's the mentality that got us here, and that's the mentality that will keep us here.
Corie, thank you so much for this. When the recording converts, I'll send it to you. I may or may not be able to delete that part where the call kept coming in. And if I can't, well, but if I can't, I'll send you the video as soon as you watch it. And if you approve it, tell me I can upload it, okay?
Okay, awesome.
Thank you so much. Have a good Father's Day and be safe.
You as well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.